Surely you can't do another live stream on the Munich Security Conference, a third one in a row, 3 days in a row, a live stream on information coming from the Munich Security Conference. Surely you can't. Hold my beer. Hold my beer. Hold my NAFO becupped tea. I use this so often that the dishwasher's starting to win the war against my NAFO cup. But man, makes 42% better tea. So, my goodness. Right. Welcome, guys. It's a nice community we have here. You guys are willing to put up with me whittering on about global geopolitics, and I am more than happy to oblige. So thank you for that. Thank you to the mods and everyone who is already in the live chat. If you're not in the live chat on this Sunday afternoon, I really don't understand what the meaning of life is for you. You need to reassess your entire life choices. I mean, honestly, sort it out. So here we are together again to talk Munich. Like I said to you yesterday, I couldn't have predicted that the Munich Security Conference would be something that featured this majorly in my life, but then here we are. So where were we yesterday? We had all sorts of speeches and analyses on the back of Marco Rubio making this speech. It got a standing ovation, but then actually when you look at the speech, it was just a very polite version of what JD Vance said last year. And now you're seeing quite a few people reiterate that. And today we also had Zelensky, we had Keir Starmer, we had Ursula von der Leyen, we had Friedrich Merz, we had Emmanuel Macron. We had the big hitters from Europe making a lot of waves with what they were saying, and a lot of good stuff from those people, Rubio aside. And today we have European leaders still, Radosław Sikorski, Kaja Kallas. She just seems to be everywhere, just everything everywhere all at once. And we have Hillary Clinton and Gavin Newsom making his own waves due to the fact that as a governor of California, he's out hobnobbing with the big movers and shakers in Europe without Donald Trump, without Marco Rubio, without JD Vance. He is there and he's been the adult in the room. It's quite significant. And then on the flip side, or in contrast to that, Marco Rubio, who gave this speech yesterday, has now gone running to his friends in Eastern Europe. Viktor Orban, who is under pressure, will probably lose the election in April, and Robert Fico, who's also under pressure a little bit. And it's pretty incredible. So there's a real contrast there where the United States diplomatic corps, the administration, is embracing the far right in Europe and the difficult people in Europe as their guys. Rubio goes straight to their guys. And for most of us who are following this war in Ukraine and supporting Ukraine, but also interested in European unity and stability and economic stability, things that we should all want, right? Economic stability, political stability, right? Security. The people who are standing up for that in Europe are the people that the Trump administration are rejecting. It's fascinating. So Rubio didn't go to the Munich Security Conference meeting with European leaders and Zelensky, and yet is paying lip service to supporting Ukraine. He said, like, oh, if it wasn't for the American billions, like he's just said this. I haven't got this clip for you. I thought about it. I should have done now because I'm now just quoting it. But he's just been interviewed on TV saying, look, if it wasn't for the American billions, Ukraine would have lost the war in the first 3 days. Yeah, it wasn't your government, though. And as soon as your government came in, you stopped that money like that. So, like, I don't understand how you can say, oh, America's amazing. Look at how we saved Ukraine, as if that's a good thing. The assumption is that's a good thing to save Ukraine. But we've taken that idea and we've reversed it because now we're giving them nothing from, people can buy stuff off us, but we're essentially giving them nothing. And actually we're favoring Russia. So it's just the narratives that are developing here are just quite astonishing. And again, it's not that I want to be anti-American or anything like this, but it's just that this bizarre situation where because actually I'm championing, and this isn't because I might otherwise support these people, it's because they're saying the right things vis-a-vis Europe and Ukraine, right? So Hillary Clinton and Gavin Newsom, awesome, like brilliant. That is American leadership as it should be, right? And that's not a yay Democrat. That is just simple, old school establishment politics, if you like. Now you could say, "Oh, we've had enough of establishment politics." Okay, well, don't embrace populism that does to America what Trumpism is doing at the moment, because that is kind of anti-establishment positioning is, I think, very dangerous. Okay, so anyway, there's my kind of preface, my introduction to what we're going to talk about today. So let's get into it. Again, thank you very much for being here, guys. Super cool. I'm on my own today, so no one fielding comments. So most of your comments, unless they're somehow particularly highlighted, they will be very difficult for me to go over. Okay, so we're going to start here. Rubio, as mentioned, is to visit Hungary and Slovakia. The line is being blurred between diplomacy on behalf of the US as a whole or representing one particular political regime only. So Reuters reports Rubio to visit Eastern Europe to bolster ties with pro-Trump leaders. Okay, so it's more about Trump, and it's more about Trumpism than it is about US diplomacy. Alan Friedman here says, so Rubio is really, really committed to Europe, as he, if you believe his speech yesterday, but he boycotted a European meeting in Munich on helping Ukraine because America is actually siding with Russia, and he prioritized a visit to Budapest to see the corrupt autocrat and traitorous fifth columnist for Putin instead. And that's where we're at. Okay, now talking about Rubio, this is Jason Crow, and again, another decent American, a veteran, talking about how he interpreted Marco Rubio's speech. So let's look at it.
There's some code in there that appeals to some in the European right, including some governments, and certainly appeals to a whole lot of people at home. Protecting your civilization and culture when coming out of this administration's mouths worries me.
Yeah, I want to be really clear here. This was not a different speech than we heard last year when J.D. Vance, again, pounded his chest in the podium and gave an aggressive, disrespectful, far-right call to Europe. This was the same speech, basically, that was just delivered smoother and more eloquently.
There you go.
Which, in my mind, kind of makes it more dangerous in some ways. So what's really important is that we stand up and we call this out.
So sometimes I wonder, whether I have imposter syndrome. I'm here just talking about geopolitics as if I know what I'm talking about, and as if I have like a long experience in discussing these matters. But that's exactly what I was saying yesterday. Jason Crow's an interesting one. He's a veteran. He's a Democrat politician, but he's got a horse in the race with regard to being both a politician but also understanding to some degree military matters.
Not only did he say things that I found disturbing, what was also important is what he did not say. Right? I never mentioned Russia once.
Never mentioned
Russia.
Never
mentioned China once. There was historical revisionism about westward movement and manifest destiny, essentially, and erased entire aspects of our history, including the Native Americans and slavery and other really important things that we need to understand have brought us to this moment. None of that mattered, and none of it was mentioned. So I'm just very disturbed about what I see as a continued effort to erase and rewrite American history to suit a very different narrative than the one that we know to be true.
Now, this is a really important point for me to make, because someone in my comments the other day on my Keir Starmer video was like someone who obviously didn't like Keir Starmer. I think it was a troll, someone that hadn't commented before, right? And he was like, oh yeah, I bet his speech was, I bet there's a bunch of jokers who wrote his speech. Like it was phrased even worse than that. It was like, God, this is the sort of speech, it even sounds like some other joker's written it. And I was like, you do realize that no leader's speech, and maybe not all of you realize this, but just in case there are some people out there, no leader writes their own speeches anymore. And that has been the case for goodness knows how long. So you have speechwriters to write your speech. And this is really important, because actually what Jason Crow just talked about there was that he ran through this history, Marco Rubio, and part of his speech about the US and blah, blah, blah. But he omitted a load of stuff that's uncomfortable, and it read like manifest destiny. Manifest destiny is this kind of almost Christian nationalistic idea about, it's a revisionist sense of American history. And like Rubio wouldn't have written that speech, right? That speech would have been written by probably the same people who wrote J.D. Vance's speech, but wanted to understood the reaction last year in Europe and wanted to write the same speech, but in politer language. And that's really important. I think that comes across with what Jason Crow was saying. Speechwriters are incredibly important, and we must understand that when a leader or a politician stands up and gives a really big speech, it is written often by a team of people who are trying to deliver the ideology of whatever entity you're representing, whether it's the American government or this party or that thing or whatever. And so speechwriters are very important. So the Pod Save America team is a very big, they started out Crooked Media, very big Democrat-leaning podcasting group. Most of them were Obama speechwriters, right? They understand policy. They were in the administration. They were driving the administration. And when Obama spoke, like the words Obama spoke were those guys' words, right? So understand, Keir Starmer didn't write his speech the other day, but the idea is that he's rubber stamping what has been written. He will have input in on it, and it's his ideology as well. But it comes through conversations with speechwriters who then deliver the speech, and then you maybe edit bits, you change things, and you fit it to you. But essentially, the speeches from leaders are Zelensky as well. So Zelensky's speeches are famously speech written by, I forget the name of the guy, but Zelensky doesn't write them. He delivers them, and he often delivers them very, very well. But they are quite incredibly written. I think the guy who wrote all of Zelensky's speeches has now written a book, or his speech has been compiled into a book, and so on and so forth. Anyway, I just think it's important to understand we forget sometimes when we hear someone speak so eloquently on stage that actually that is a result of days of a team of people getting together to write that speech. Right. Okay. So then we move to Hillary Clinton, who's at the MSC. I presume this is from the MSC as well, though the backing looks a little bit different. Here's what she has to say.
I think that the Trump administration's position toward Ukraine is disgraceful. I think the effort to force Ukraine into a surrender deal with Putin is shameful. I think the effort that Putin and Trump are making to profit off the misery and death of the Ukrainian people is a historic error and corrupt to the nth degree. And so I believe
this is absolutely on the money. Goodness knows what the world would look like if Hillary Clinton won in 2016, but probably a lot better place.
Ukraine is fighting for our democracy and our values of freedom and civilization, on the front lines, losing thousands of people and having their country destroyed by one man's mania to control them. And I think Trump either doesn't understand or could care less about that suffering. So that's what I think.
And so do you think he has destroyed the West? To go to our title.
He has betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. He's betrayed the NATO Charter, the Atlantic Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. A lot of what has been done before to try to make sense of how difficult it is to restrain people who want unaccountable power. And none of us in this room, including all of us on this panel, would choose to live under a regime that was so unaccountable that it could act with impunity the way that Putin does, except that's who Trump is modeling himself.
I don't think
modeling himself on Putin. And I just like, this is obviously a troll. Flash SXM. Dems really wanted World War III. I love these kind of comments. I mean, Flash, honestly, is ridiculous. Let's just dismiss this out of hand. I love this. Let's blame the Dems for wanting to support Ukraine rather than Putin for invading another country in an illegal genocidal manner. Like, let's just forget about the moral bankruptcy of someone that wants to eradicate another nation, and let's blame the people who are supporting that nation. Doris is getting the shit kicked out of her across the road. Let's blame the person that's trying to provide her with pepper spray to stop Ivan kicking the crap out of her. Let's do that, shall we? Yes, Flash, let's do that. Let's be equally as morally disingenuous. So thank you very much, Flash. Whatever, Trevor. Right, moving on. Sorry, I was actually genuinely getting angry then. My face feels flushed, and it's good sometimes to get some moral righteousness, because I'm feeling that way. Right, we're going to go back to this same breakout session, this time now with Gavin Newsom.
I'm here to sort of fill that void and to express what I hope you understand, that Donald Trump is not only temporary, but he may be among the most un-American presidents ever to have resided at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
So he's really going to town on Trump here. Oh, and by the way, Flash, grow up, mates. If your answer to an argument is an emoji, you've got the mental age of a 2-year-old. So, yeah, whatever.
And I really believe that. I don't say that lightly.
So bear in mind that is getting a round of applause. This is essentially what people believe. So let's hear that again.
I'm here to sort of fill that void and to express what I hope you understand, that Donald Trump is not only temporary, but he may be among the most un-American presidents ever to have resided at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. And I really believe that. I don't say that lightly. He's an invasive species. He's taken over the Republican Party. You know, I sit every single day in Ronald Reagan's old office. Ronald Reagan was governor of California. Ronald Reagan would be ashamed of this moment in time. You know, Ronald Reagan, whose last speech in the Oval Office was about Lady Liberty's torch, about the energy and daring of newcomers and what defines America from the rest of the globe. I'm here.
Really interesting metaphor there, talking about an invasive species that Donald Trump has managed to take over the GOP, the grand old party, the Republican Party in the United States, like an invasive species, and has spread that thinking. Those tendrils have extended throughout the party and taken roots, and now essentially, instead of a meadow of, you know, different thoughts, but okay, clearly conservative Republican thoughts, it is now just a sea of weeds of the MAGA variety, and yeah, I would generally agree with that. Right, again, to go to Gavin Newsom.
Thank you for acknowledging our National Guard.
We are now, this is going to be an extended excerpt from him, where he's going to talk to you or us or the audience about Ukraine specifically.
Same National Guard that were federalized and weaponized by the Trump administration. They're training the Ukrainians before the war and continue to advise. We're very proud. We've sent 7 field hospitals to Ukraine. We have one of the largest nonprofits in the world, Direct Relief, that sent over $2.2 billion of supplies, medical supplies to Ukraine. And the MOU we signed today is all about the rebuild. But it's not about the version that Donald Trump is advancing. And again, forgive me, I know I could come off a little aggressively, but I can back up what I'm saying. I want to remind you, just in terms of the self-dealing, part of the peace plan the president was pursuing with Jared Kushner and Witkoff and the head of the Sovereign Wealth Fund in Russia was around the rebuild and who gets their piece of that rebuild. That's, again, not the America I grew up in.
So he is very explicitly saying that Kushner and Witkoff are lining their own pockets, and the people around them are lining their own pockets by doing these peace deals, that really the objective isn't world peace. So Trump's board of peace, and we're going to return to this at the end of the video, but Trump's board of peace is more about grifting than it is about actual peace. That is the modus operandi from the Trump administration, and he's calling that out very explicitly.
So we want peace. We want the right deal, but we don't want a piece of Ukraine. That's what distinguishes at least our belief system and our approach from the current administration. I thought it was I thought it was one of his strongest speeches today. I thought it was outstanding. And what a case he made, and what a point of pride to have his back and to be back. And I will just end on, just because you painted a human face. I don't know if any of you have been to the Ukraine house, and you walk in and there's this beautiful video. I didn't know what it meant. I walked in and out 2 or 3 times without pausing.
Can I just say another thing? And I did this, sorry to interrupt, but actually it's really relevant to interrupt at this point. When I did my Keir Starmer video and the video yesterday, there's a number of times I've been remarking lately that, can you imagine Donald Trump saying this speech, like speaking in these granular, because even when Donald Trump has provided a speech by his speechwriters, right, this is actually, let's go full circle here. When he's provided a speech by speechwriters, he just goes off piste, and he'll like come across something that triggers something in his head, and he goes, oh, and then he riffs on that thing, whether it be tariffs or this or that. And so he kind of vaguely goes through a speech, but then he's just going off on tangents all the time. But the speech isn't particularly granular. He's never speaking in detail. There's never real solid policy discussion. It's more talking about talking points in vagueness. And there's also generally a lack of empathy. He's not an empathetic person, Trump. And I don't think, because empathy underwrites morality. So I don't want to go off on one now, but I've written extensively on this, and even things like going down to looking at a physiological level, like mirror neurons. So mirror neurons are neurons we have in our brains that trigger every time. So they first, I think some Italian scientists found this out when they were doing vivisection, or they were poking around at monkeys' brains in a lab, and an Italian scientists walked in eating an ice cream, and the monkey's brain started firing off, and they then noticed that, hang on, these neurons are firing in a way as if the monkey is eating the ice cream. What's going on here? So when we have empathy, what we are doing is we're putting ourselves in the shoes of other people, right? And actually, when we often help people, it's because we are feeling there. So for example, if you see someone that's got injured and they're lying like crying on the roadside or something, or you look at Doris getting the crap kicked out of her, what's happening is your mirror neurons are firing to say, that is me getting the crap kicked out of me, and how would I feel if that was me? And so you empathize with people because you can have intersubjectivity. So you put yourself from your shoes into their shoes, and then that underwrites morality. So our kindness and generosity and our desire to go and help people who are in need of help comes often from our understanding that, well, what if that was us? Like, I actually think that is me, that I'm feeling that is me. That's how empathy works. And then kindness and morality, like pro-social behavior, then derives from that process. And so people who don't naturally feel empathy, there's talks about, certain people on the autistic spectrum having to learn rather than intuit certain responses, but although that's also controversial because there's been some counter evidence to this. But anyway, if you lack empathy, then you don't have veto to you doing horrible things, right? So you can end up doing really, truly, like, for example, if you're looking at what ICE is doing in Minneapolis, what they're doing there, like my thought is generally these people who are ordering that to take place don't have particularly decent empathic responses. And so anyway, I go off on one. I said I wouldn't, and now I've gone off on one. The point is, Gavin Newsom is clearly empathetic because he's now going to give you he's riffing, right? So this is a Q&A session, but you would never see Trump do this. You would never see, and this is so important. Like, we need to understand, like, who our leaders are. Trump is not a decent human. He's not an empathetic human. He doesn't go into Ukraine house. First of all, he's not bothered to do that. He wouldn't want to do that. Gavin Newsom's gone into Ukraine house and he's seen a video that has touched him, and he's touched him enough because he's got that empathy that he sits down and says, Do you know what I've just experienced? I've experienced this. That is not a thing that Donald Trump would ever, or I would wager could ever do, because I assume that he's got dysfunctional mirror neurons in his brain. You know, you can pare it down to, I guess, that kind of level.
Which is at least our belief system and our approach from the current administration. I thought it was I thought it was one of his strongest speeches today. I thought it was outstanding. And what a case he made, and what a point of pride to have his back and to be back. And I will just end on, just because you painted a human face. I don't know if any of you have been to the Ukraine house, and you walk in and there's this beautiful video. I didn't know what it meant. I walked in and out 2 or 3 times without pausing. I've got 4 young kids, and there's 2 kids on the screen, 2 beautiful young girls that were kidnapped. And they finally found them, brought them back home. And the video is of the 2 beautiful young girls waking up for the first time back at home in their bed. That's what this war is about. Human beings. Yeah, it's about human dignity, free expression. It's about democracy. It's about Europe. It's about all the values we hold dear. It is about the alliance, but the preciousness of life as well. And so
honestly, I'm going to repeat myself again, but Donald Trump could never say that. He can never make those connections. He said that, you know, these are real human connections that Gavin Newsom is making, which makes him a far superior human being to Donald Trump, far better human being than Donald Trump would ever be. And I get really pissed off when, I'm feeling it today, so sorry to swear, but like when I see people on these forums that are just like, I hate Gavin Newsom, blah, and they're going so to town on him, and like, I really love Trump this, Trump that, Trump this. And you're like, who would I want to teach my children to be to be more like someone who can sit here and empathize with the plight of Ukrainian children who've gone through whatever, and then are waking up at home and like, talking through this video and connecting this to the human aspects of a war that is so horrific? Or Donald Trump, that's someone who's just absolutely physiologically unable to do something like that. Like, I would want my children to be more Gavin Newsom than Donald Trump. And it's just that simple. He's just a better human being.
It's about all the values we hold dear. It is about the alliance, but the preciousness of life as well. And so I pray that the president's desire for the deal leads to a deal that's good for Europe, that's good for the Ukrainian people, but sets the tone and tenor for the world that we're trying to build.
Exactly. It sets that tone and tenor for the world we are trying to build. And I just think that is that's a really decent way of putting it. So anyway, just to return to Hillary Clinton, calls out Trump. The Trump administration's position towards Ukraine is disgraceful. He betrayed the West. He's betrayed human values. And that's kind of, so we just heard that from her. But that's what Gavin Newsom there is talking about. So then it's fascinating. So, okay. Before we go and look at the next part, and I talked about this in my hits and losses video today, but Gavin Newsom is doing several things here. He's I don't know whether he was invited here or whether he invited himself. I presume he's invited because he's on these panels, right? And so then there's an element of, oh, that's interesting. So if he's getting these invites, is that because Europe is, or the people who organize the Munich Security Conference are cognizant that he is an alternative to Trump, and they are trying to, amplify Clinton and Newsom over Trump? Is that quite divisive? Is that going to annoy the Trump administration? But on the other hand, Newsom is getting himself on the international stage and showing Trump up. So when you're looking forward to 2028 and you're thinking who's going to be in the hat for presidential for the president of the United States, Gavin Newsom's there, and he's been there or thereabouts for some time now. He's been all over social media, and he's been very good on social media, and his press team have been lambasting Trump in very kind of sarcastic and eviscerating Trump's own social media presence. But this is the other side of Newsom, which is, and I can turn up to the Munich Security Conference, and this is me. Imagine I'm president. This is me as a serious, thoughtful, and knowledgeable diplomatic operator. Can you imagine me as president? And I would argue that what I see from Gavin Newsom at the Munich Security Conference is far more presidential than JD Vance, than Marco Rubio, than certainly Donald Trump. And again, I'm doing this on a purely like human terms. So like, I'm not because I prefer Democrats to Republicans, et cetera, but look at what he says and how he says it and how he comports himself. And he's actually far more presidential, I would argue, than any of those others. Honestly, I think so. I think what you're seeing here is a trial run, or is part, he's campaigning for 2028 already. This is his campaign for 2028, as well as doing the right thing in terms of supporting Ukraine and saying the right thing. So it's not only, moral obligation, but there is certainly going to be an aspect of political opportunism here in the right way. Okay. And it's absolutely incredible that he's almost treating California like its own state now. And I think he's got every right to do that. It's the fourth biggest economy in the world. If it were a state, fifth or fourth. And he's in a position to be able to assist Ukraine, but not just from a moral political point of view, from an economic point of view. Like I've said to you so many times, every time you see assistance packages going to Ukraine, there will be strings attached. So when Denmark supports Mykolaiv, it's they're not just supporting that region for shits and giggles. They are supporting it because it's a way of getting their products and their companies and their services helping to rebuild Mykolaiv, and it's a form of economic stimulus for Denmark. So if California can do a memorandum of understanding with Lviv Oblast in the west of Ukraine, then it's getting American, probably a lot of tech as well, and knowing how good Ukraine is with tech, you're going to have that relationship, that tech relationship between Lviv, which is a very lively area with a lot of startups and all sorts, and you're going to get American rebuilding coming into Lviv. So from a Californian point of view, it makes a lot of sense. It's not just about political opportunism. It's about economic opportunism, actually. So California is now bypassing Trump to help Ukraine with billions. Today, California signed a memorandum of understanding with Ukraine, even amid the chaos and anxiety in Washington, says Newsom. California continues to lead as a steady transatlantic partner. So he's talking in nation-state terms here, which is to say that, hey, we can do what the state of the United States isn't doing. He said, we will always be a global partner for good. So he's putting California onto the global stage. And again, this is a dry run for being the president. You just substitute the United States for California there, and you've got him being president. And if we like what he's doing with California, then that's kind of what we'd like as a president. This is what we are all missing. He's filling the gap, which is what he said. He literally said, I'm filling the gap of, of where Donald Trump isn't. So there you go. Is that what he said at the beginning of that first one? Yeah. So remember, so then let's just go back and re-listen to this.
I'm here to sort of fill that void and to express what I hope you understand, that Donald
I'm here to fill that void and express what I hope you understand.
Trump is not only temporary, but he may be among the most un-American.
He's not just temporary, but he's horrible. But he ain't going to last. This isn't going to last forever. And in 3 years' time, I'm going to be the guy that's operating here. So please don't completely discount the United States as a reliable ally, is what he's saying. So here, again, honored to meet the Deputy Governor Alexander Kulepin of Lviv, Ukraine, to oversee the signing of the Memorandum of Understanding between California and Lviv Oblast. We're strengthening trade, supporting sustainable reconstruction and economic development, and deepening our sister state partnership. So the reason you have twin towns and sister states is it's a positive sum game where you are both, it's a win-win situation. Well, here, he's seeing that as an opportunity not only to be moral and political, but to get some economic benefit for California. Gavin Newsom on Trump. This is temporary. MAGA will not survive past Donald Trump. He's a cult of personality. I said invasive species. Some of you may not know what I mean. So, and that's just reiterating what he said earlier. Yeah, so actually, we'll go into this because he says it slightly differently. I said invasive species. Some of you may not know what I mean, but he took over the Republican Party. That old Republican Party, some of them are here. None of us recognize them. They don't. So he's talking about people like Lindsey Graham, right? He's talking about Republicans who are there at the conference, but he's saying, you know, none of us recognize them. They don't recognize themselves. Rubio doesn't recognize himself. He was one of the most effective critics of Donald Trump in the United States. He should rewatch his old videos. He was right. Lindsey Graham was right. So when they're criticizing Donald Trump, they're right. This is temporary, he says. Now, as if that wasn't enough, he's going and meeting with leaders of countries. So he's met with the Bundeskanzler, the Chancellor of Germany, Friedrich Merz. So Friedrich Merz here says, and I'll translate this. My German isn't that good. The translation, I did get an A at GCSE. I think it was an A. Was it a B? I think I got an A. The transatlantic partnership is precious. In times of great powers, we will depend on mutual trust. Gavin Newsom and I agree. Together, we are stronger. The NATO is our common competitive advantage. So Merz is now treating Newsom as some kind of voice on NATO, and US is some kind of representative of the US. So this is interesting. Could be somewhat controversial, and we'll see that in a second. Gavin Newsom says, couldn't agree more. Our strength, so he's speaking on behalf of the United States, our strength comes from our unity and partnership. California will continue to proclaim those principles in the absence of leadership in Washington. If the US isn't willing to do this, California will. Honestly, this is proper fascinating geopolitics, in my opinion. This is the stuff that makes me want to come and speak to you guys. Like, I was going through these things earlier today, just going, oh, I can't wait to speak about this. I find this really interesting, and I'm quite excited because I'm quite sick of just slagging off the United States essentially every day, vis-a-vis, you know, qua Trump, right? But I'd really like to get back to saying, yeah, the US has done loads to help Ukraine, or the US is doing a good thing here or a good thing there. And at the moment, I can't say that because everything that Trump does is insane. So then you've got Richard Grenell, so Dick Grenell, as he's known, aptly, saying as part of it, what's his role now? He used to be an ambassador, I think, or I'm stronger after cancer. Imperfect follower of Christ. He is in the administration. He was one of the authors, I think, of the Project 2025 as well for the administration of the Heritage Foundation. But anyway, he says German government embraces Gavin Newsom, quite possibly the biggest Merz gaffe to date. So Richard Grenell is coming out and saying this is a real gaffe for Friedrich Merz to get into bed with Newsom to start, you know, dealing with people who aren't president, who aren't secretary of state, who aren't vice president. The thing is, yeah, great. He'd probably be speaking to Marco Rubio, but Rubio buggered off to Eastern Europe to have a massage with Robert Fico and Viktor Orban, like have some kind of toad in a hole or something. So Helmut Brandstätter, who's a member of European Parliament for the Germans, says, sorry, why should a German chancellor not speak with a US governor? Like, what is wrong with that? Why is it such a gaffe? To which Thomas Hendrik says, no, they just met. Is not a gaffe. Vance pointedly did not meet the German chancellor last year. So remember, Vance refused to meet Olaf Scholz and then went instead to meet Alice Weidel, the head of the AfD. So don't lecture us on what's a gaffe and what isn't, when Vance previously, the vice president refused to meet the German chancellor. So now the chancellorship, if you like, of Germany is going to be a little bit annoyed about that, right? So that is an embrace. But otherwise, the chancellor always meets with leading US political figures. Interesting. And then you've got Newsom here, like, and this is probably one of many, here having met with a Spanish prime minister. And we're going to come back to Pedro Sánchez because he's also doing some good stuff at the moment. From economic development to climate action, the world can always look to California as a strong, reliable ally. Interesting because Spain has been hit very badly by issues with climate recently, some horrendous floods and also fires over the last sort of years. And of course, there's going to be that Spanish connection to California. So I guess this is quite a sensible alignment there. And of course, California has worsening wildfires and all sorts going on there. So, you know, there's probably lots to talk about. But interesting that Newsom is stepping into that void. Okay, right. So then we have here another moment we're going to listen to.
Grateful for your leadership is not voted. And you, dear Lindsey Graham, was talking about this bill last year in Munich during the Munich Security Conference. Frozen assets that...
So basically you got, and I missed the first 30 seconds of this. Basically you got a question saying like, yeah, great to see you here, but Lindsey Graham, but you're talking about a bill that you talked about last year and it still hasn't really, it's not been signed off by Trump. So, you know, what's going on there? And frozen Russian assets
have been promised here in Germany to be sent to Ukraine during the elections, unfortunately, are not flying, right? They are not given to Ukraine. And at the same time, my best friend has +5 in her apartment with 2 kids. And my nanny for 4 weeks didn't have heating with -26 Celsius. And I will not continue. But the question is, don't you think you said that you will not support the agreement which Ukraine doesn't support itself? But the question is, does Ukraine have today all the means to achieve the agreement that will be possible for Ukrainian citizens to support and for you to support yourself? So when all those measures that you've mentioned will be given to Ukraine to achieve that achievement? Thank you.
Yeah, it's taken a long time. But let me say this, I'm proud of what my country's done for Ukraine. We gave you javelins early on. I'm proud of what Europe's done. You stepped up to the occasion. So Ukraine's going to have to make a hard decision. You're not going to evict every Russian. So what I want to do is make sure the deal doesn't lead to a third invasion, that you're an independent, sovereign country still standing. I'm sorry it's not fast enough, but there are a lot of people in America that are conflicted about this. A lot of people wondering, what are we doing? So I'm doing my best to explain it to them. You're doing your best to fight. I've had a lot of engagements with allies who are less than spectacular when it came to sacrificing. I will say this, Ukraine has sacrificed as much for their freedom as any country on the planet since World War II.
100%. And he says the right things in these kind of contexts, but the problem is that he's always got to deal with the Trump and the Trump administration. And so he was Trump's critic before Trump came in Trump 1.0 and then became his lapdog. And ever since then, so it is. And he clearly wants a bill to get through, but it's all dependent on Trump. But he can't come out and publicly slag off Trump because he realizes that they've probably got a lot of compromise on him. If you know the background of Lindsey Graham, and for those who don't, I mean, it's very plausibly, how would you say in Christian nationalist terms, he's sexually deviant, shall we say. And there are awful lot of rumors about Lindsey Graham. And actually, if you understand this, you understand why Lindsey Graham does what he does. So he says as much as he can. I mean, I'm not a fan of Lindsey Graham because for many reasons, but he is right on Ukraine most of the time. But he can't come out and publicly criticize Trump because there will be an awful lot of compromise that gets released on him. And once you understand that, you understand Lindsey Graham. I think you understand why he's a slippery eel, because they just have loads of compromise on him and have done probably for decades. So there you go. But you know, at least he's there advocating for Ukraine, which is good. And Don Bacon here, the Nebraska representative Republican, who is now, because he's retiring, because he doesn't like what the Trump administration is doing, and he's a really strong supporter of Ukraine, is coming out and being more and more overtly in defense of Ukraine and critical of the Trump administration. In fact, he's voted against a bunch of recent bills or for certain bills. He's basically sided with with Democrats a number of times recently. So Don Bacon has said Ukraine has done more than any other country to weaken Russia after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Russia hates the US and Western values. I agree with the Polish Prime Minister. This is Donald Tusk who said, to do with a prize that Ukraine has just received, or the people of Ukraine have just received. He said even the Nobel Peace Prize would not be enough. Some say that Ukraine should be grateful for everything. So this is a reference to J.D. Vance and Trump in the White House, in the Oval Office, saying that, hey, why don't you ever say thank you? Why haven't you said thank you? Blah, blah, blah. So some say Ukraine should be grateful for everything. The truth is exactly the opposite. The rest of us should be grateful for Ukraine. Now, I read Tusk saying that last night, and I was lying in bed. This is how sad I am. But trying to go to sleep last night, I was imagining, I usually do this in the shower. I'm not trying to, there's a great, one of my favorite memes is a pie chart. I'll dig it out for you. I've shown you once before. There's a pie chart that has, you know, everything in one color apart from this tiny sliver at the top. And the tiny sliver at the top is washing myself in the shower, and the rest of this is, and the pie chart is what I do in the shower. Washing myself in the shower is a tiny sliver, and the rest of it is winning imaginary arguments. And it just speaks to me, because what I do when I was doing my philosophy of religion, I'd take William Lane Craig and I would be having arguments with him, and I'd be on the debate stage in the shower. No, I wouldn't be on the debate stage in the shower, but that's what I'd be imagining, like winning these arguments and saying, well, I'd say this, I'd say that, I'd do this. But last night I was in bed imagining an argument, or sitting down with Donald Trump, interviewing him or whatnot, and coming out with this idea. It's like, you demanded, like, actually I'd love to be a journalist and just speak to Donald Trump, say, look, you demanded he say thank you, but do you not think it's appropriate that you should thank Zelensky and really the people of Ukraine for what they have done in laying down their lives and their country to defend democracy and to try and keep security in Europe on behalf of Europe and the United States? Do you not think that you should actually just turn it? Do you not, tell me why you shouldn't thank Ukraine? And I would, so it's not just about, do you think, because that's a closed question, right? It's a yes or no question. Try and move away from yes or no questions unless you really want to get someone caught. But go for an open question. It's like, tell me why you shouldn't thank the Ukrainians. Tell me, Donald Trump, why you shouldn't thank the Ukrainians. And then I'll sit back and watch him. Blah, 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 blah. I'm amazing. I've got the greatest stats ever. Like, people in whatever state love me. Yeah, no, that's not what I asked you, mate. Anyway, that's what I do. So there you go. Right, let's. I keep interrupting myself. I do apologize. So Donald Tusk there, good Donald, saying the right things. So then that moves us on to Poland. Radosław Sikorski, the foreign minister. I expect one day this man's going to be prime minister, surely. So he said, let me be clear. Europe is now paying for this war. This is really important, because people in positions of power are now saying this very overtly. Like, and we haven't heard Trump say this so much recently, which is, oh, the US has paid $300 billion. It's like, no, you haven't. And Europe needs to pay more. Europe is paying everything at the moment. Everything. Oh, Canada and Australia and Japan, etc. Europe is now paying for this war. We are buying American weapons to deliver to Ukraine. US supplemental package ran out last year. We are paying. This is our security, and therefore we deserve a seat at the negotiating table. You cannot ignore Europe now. We're paying for this. We're paying for Ukraine's defense here. We are entitled. This is a European war. We are entitled to a seat at the negotiating table. Again, Sikorski, if the United States forces Ukraine into an unfair agreement, we will continue our commitment to Ukraine. Only Ukraine has a right to decide when to strike a deal. And at that point, Putin will no longer be able to ignore us, because we will become Ukraine's main supplier. If we are paying, if this affects our security and not only Ukraine's, then we deserve a seat at the negotiating table, because the outcome of this war will also affect us. If the Russians cross the border and begin killing NATO citizens, we will activate the plan. The plan is simple. We win, they lose. Amen, brother. Sikorski, brilliant. I'd love to one day, I mean, I probably could if I really tried hard enough, but I'd never have time to sort out interviews. But I'd love to interview Radosław Sikorski and his wife, Anne Applebaum. Like, both of those would be like two people I'd love to speak to. Adam Kinzinger's another one. Just certain people just really, really want to chat to. So Sikorski saying, let me be clear, Europe is paying for this war. Michael Weiss, the journalist who writes a lot on Ukraine, says Trump asks Europe, to spend more lest it be reliant on charity and patronage. Europe pays for almost everything in Ukraine, yet now somehow America uses this largesse to continue to dictate terms. It doesn't work that way in business or geopolitics. And Poland, per Colby, is a model partnership ally and frontline state. So what he's referring to is a national security strategy that has Poland as this state that they want to peel away from the EU as one of the 4 states, I think, that were explicitly mentioned, but also Elbridge Colby saying Poland is this model state because they see it as a conservative, like MAGA type state, because the Law and Justice Party, PIS, that was previously running the government and still has a president, Nawrocki, associated with the PIS, although he started as an independent. But anyway, like, they are pretty MAGA. They're Eurosceptic and like conservative. You get a lot of, I almost wrote an article once on, what was it? There's a movement in the US whereby they were putting people through. In fact, there was a great documentary on Channel 4 once of this. Where they have these religious universities that are pumping out conservative Christians with the sole objective of getting them into Congress. So there's this long-term, this is where the Democrats just fail compared to the Republicans or certain subsets of Republicanism, like Heritage Foundation and these kind of Christian nationalists in the US. They have long-term plans. The Republican strategy has been buying up TV network distribution companies, like, or having them in your pocket, like Sinclair, and buying up talk radio. This is like decades long strategizing, and then the Democrats get to a point of being beaten in elections and going, damn, how did that happen? It's like, well, look at the infrastructure that the Republicans have. They've bought out, like, Latino radio stations, and they bought out entire distribution networks of both television and radio, and they've got podcasts sewn up. Like, that is what happens when you strategize and do a project that is 30 years in the making, and they get there, and then they win elections because they control the narrative and they control the means of disseminating information and you could say propaganda, right? So if the Democrats want to win going forward, unless it's some kind of landslide victory because the Republicans have done something horrendous like this tenure, but just going forward, you need to buy up that infrastructure. You need to be thinking strategically, right? But anyway, I'm getting away from my point, which was in America, they've got this project where they're trying to kick out a load of fundamentalist Christians into Congress, right? And they do that in I can't remember the university, but they do that in Poland as well. There's a university in Poland where they are real conservative Christians that they're kind of kicking these people out into, but not just like, you're not just being educated for the sake of being educated. You are being trained to go into politics, because then that it is a way of, like, ideologically taking over the country, right? Because our people we are training our people with this certain ideology, and we're putting them through university, and we're giving them all the skills to become politicians, and then we get them into political positions, and then we control the country, and then that comes back and benefits us, and everyone is so on and so forth. But yeah, I forget what the universities are in each case, or yeah, there's a really good, that it is indeed indoctrination, but there's a really good New Humanist article on this several years ago with regard to Poland. I was going to write an article myself on Poland and that some years back. Anyway, Law and Justice Party were also proponents of that, and that's that kind of MAGA moving into religion as well, kind of. They're close bedfellows. Anyway, I am digressing, but that's why you're here, right? I guess, maybe. TVP World here saying, well, actually, let's listen to Sikorski in his own words here.
Europe should be at the table because the stakes are incredibly high. It's not that just the future of Ukraine, it's not just the security of the eastern flank, it is about the place of Europe in the future distribution of power in the world. In other words, who will be the third leg of global distribution? China, United States, and Russia, or the European Union? Don't ask me which I would prefer. And to my mind, President Trump is not wrong when he says that in this more brutal world, you need to show your cards. The United States would give itself more cards to pressure Putin into a deal by, for example, delivering tomahawks to Ukrainians. And the decision was apparently quite close a couple of months ago. Taurises would help too. But as Europe, what we should say is that if the US forces Ukraine into an unfair deal, we will continue with our commitment to Ukraine, and it is Ukraine that will decide when to make a deal. And then we will not be able to be ignored by Putin because we will then become the main provider to Ukraine.
So, yeah, I think really well elucidated there by Sikorski. And Sikorski, in another example of or another session, was having a debate with the Polish foreign minister. No, sorry, he's a Polish foreign minister with the Czech. Was it the Czech deputy prime minister or something like that? And they got into an argument, and Sikorski, this myth that gave us Brexit, that somehow Brussels bureaucrats are imposing directives on member states, is complete nonsense. That's not how the EU works. He actually really stood up for the EU being a democratic organization. Now, it's true, in Brexit, we had these big debates that, the EU's not democratic. It is, it's very democratic. But the problem is when you have intranational and international organizations, you're necessarily going to be diluting direct democracy, right? Because you have to take into account all these different people and all these different, the bigger you get, the kind of more cumbersome it becomes. But it is democratic. That's precisely why there are things like vetoes, why Hungary gets to say what they want, why things take so long to decide, because it is a democrat. It's not dictatorial. If it's dictatorial, things get decided like this. So Liz Webster takes us on and says, look, MAGA wants to force Europe to destroy democracy. Compare the two systems. The EU Commission proposes, the European Parliament, the elected votes, who are elected, they vote. The Council, the national governments must then approve. Member states co-legislate. And all of these are different degrees of voted. USA, Congress passes federal law, president signs, and states must comply or challenge in court. So in fact, there's more democratic, arguably more democratic steps in how things get decided in the United States, in the EU than in the United States. So those who denigrate the EU for not being democratic, I think probably don't understand really the process and how it works. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting aside there. Right. So we've already had that from Donald Tusk. So taking on, we're going from Poland now to, we're going to stay with Poland and then move through to some other nations. So then President Nawrocki has said, I'm a huge advocate of Poland having our own nuclear project while respecting all international regulations. We're a country on the brink of armed conflict. It's clear that what the aggressive Imperial Russian Federation's attitude towards Poland is. So this is fascinating because what happens is if you don't, Trump says, and for a long time he said, he hates nuclear. And I think if you look back in time, he is not a fan of, he is genuinely scared of nuclear war, right? Trump is one of his, one of the very, the only policy consistent thing with Trump appears to be tariffs. He's always been big on tariffs. He loves tariffs. I don't think he properly understands how they work, but he loves them, right? And that's consistent right through his 2 tenures and going back before that, actually. And another thing is being afraid of nuclear war. Going back into early Trump years, you can see hints of that. It is something that does scare him, right? But what's happened with the United States moving back from putting pressure on Russia is still fighting this war, when if Trump had come in January 2025 and gone to town on Russia, this war, I think, would be over by now. And what this has meant is that now other nations, with Trumpism taking the US away from Europe, Europe is then going, we want our own nuclear umbrella. And you've got Germany and Poland going, well, if you guys have got nukes, and actually, you know, that would have stopped Ukraine from being invaded, and we're kind of next on the map here, well, maybe we should have nukes. So the isolationism, or the lack of assistance for Ukraine from a Trump administration's point of view, is, I think, directly feeding the desire for other nations to become nuclear nations, which is something that Trump definitely doesn't like. But that's the ramification of his own policy making. So to continue, I won't tell you whether this will happen or when it will happen. Building Poland's security, even if it involves resistance to nuclear potential, is a direction I support. How might Russia react to this? He answers, Russia can react aggressively to anything. We Poles need to feel safe. So I thought that was fascinating. And then we're going to go to a Greenlandic leader here. Now, I'm not going to play, it's 2 minutes 40 here. I'm just going to give you the headline, because this is a real rebuke of Trump and his Greenland posture. This is from the Greenlandic Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nilsson, who says, the pressure on us is unacceptable. Even with Russia and China, Greenlanders never felt threatened. First time that they felt unsafe for real was when an ally talked about acquiring them. It's outrageous. This is a really important statement. Honestly, this is really, really interesting, where he goes, sorry, I was trying to read the live comments there. He's saying, look, Russia and China, they never, like, people weren't afraid in their houses because of Russia and China, but literally people have been worried about the United States invading Greenland. People have been scared in their houses in Greenland because of an ally threatening them. That is outrageous. He said the pressure on us is unacceptable. And I think that's absolutely right. So then that leads us on to this. This is fascinating. Honestly, there is so much interesting stuff going on in the world now. Not all of it good, by the way. So Canada and Denmark have formalized a pact to defend one another, even beyond the existing NATO framework. This is not symbolic, it is a clear signal. Any move against Greenland would now mean immediate conflict with both Canada and Denmark. Now, I've not seen this in mainstream media, by the way. I'm only reading it here. So I need to look at this, right? Caveat, caveat, caveat. But if this is true, this is absolutely, this is so important. And it is also quite genius. If the US starts making a military move on Greenland, they are going to war with Canada. Any move against Greenland would now mean immediate conflict with both Canada and Denmark. The message is simple and unmistakable. Territorial aggression will not be tolerated. Given the growing instability surrounding Trump and the strain it has placed on alliances, this step feels less like escalation and more like necessary insurance. NATO already looks fragile. Trust inside the alliance has been shaken. When global security hangs in a balance, clarity and solidarity matter. This agreement draws a line that reminds the world that democratic nations can still stand firmly together. Now, I need to fact check that. So I don't know if any of you in the live chat could fact check that for me, or see if there's a link to a mainstream media article on that. I've not looked into that, but it just honestly, there's just a really interesting segue there from what the Greenlandic leader said to that. And wow, what a time we live in when you have Canada and Denmark doing a deal over Greenland in case the United States invades it. Meanwhile, Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin are popping champagne corks. It's just absolutely incredible. Okay. So then to go to Denmark, I went through this yesterday. Mette Frederiksen was actually this morning in the Hits and Losses video saying that Ukraine cannot fight with one hand tied behind its back, that these red lines on weapons still exist and they shouldn't do. Ukraine needs weapons to hit deep into Russian territory. So the Danish Prime Minister is now very explicitly advocating for long-range weapons being provided like Taurus, like Tomahawks to Ukraine. Now we're going to go on to Peter Magyar, the opposition leader in Hungary, who is odds-on favourite to win the elections. In Munich, I concluded my series of bilateral meetings with Finnish President Alexander Stubb. So we have the opposition leader from Hungary going to Munich Security Conference, but not Viktor Orban. Viktor Orban staying back at home and having Marco Rubio come to him. The past 24 hours have been intense. Over the past day, I held discussions with nearly a dozen European leaders about the tasks ahead. In each meeting, I emphasized that Hungary supports peace, negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in every possible way. I also underlined that the top priority of the Tisza government, so his party, will be securing the EU funds Hungary is entitled to. I told you. So, and of course, this is the case, right? But I said that as soon, like, if he gets to power, he can use this as a campaign bribe. You vote for us, we will be European looking, we will be Western oriented, we will not be in Russia's sphere of influence, we will be embracing the EU and its values. And that will release all the frozen EU funding that we've not been given because Viktor Orban has democratically been backsliding and has been moving towards Russian influence. We will secure that funding for the Hungarian people. And then you get a massive economic stimulus. Then the Hungarian economy will start doing better. It's now one of the worst operating economies in Europe, in the EU, and it's the most corrupt. So then you start cleaning stuff up. You have loads of money come from Europe. Europe supports you, and Hungary starts looking like Poland, which has taken EU money and has done an amazing, I think I saw a comparison of some graphs comparing Poland to Hungary and their successes, and Poland blows Hungary out the water. 56 days left, he says. So that's something to look forward to. Now here we have the Jab of the Heart and Suggs from UB40 here. No, Suggs from Madness here. Fico and Orban have been put under pressure. The Dutch government believes that Slovakia and Hungary do not sufficiently uphold fundamental European values and has proposed limiting their funding and voting rights. It seems the European Union is growing tired of the anti-European and anti-Ukrainian rhetoric that follows these two Putin allies wherever they appear. We've been talking about this for ages. It hasn't happened yet. When is it going to happen? Hungarian elections are in April, by the way. I don't know when in April, but yeah. So let's get this happening, which is these nations being put under pressure for their obstinacy. But the problem is, and actually, as I said, the EU is a democratic organization full of democratic countries. And if the Fico government was genuinely voted in, and if they have views that might be antithetical to the rest of the EU or problematic for Ukraine, they're entitled to do that through a representative democracy. So as difficult as Fico and Orban are, unless you're democratically backsliding, which I think is punishable for, you can take away funding that's due to go to Hungary, for example, if they start doing things that go against what you have to achieve in order to accede to the EU. So transparency, and anti-corruption, free press, free judiciary, so on and so forth. All these things, if you start backsliding on them, then there are warranted punishments for that, right? But if you're just going to vote against what all your mates think should be the right thing to do, then it's difficult to punish them for that because that's their democratic prerogative, right? So we need to be careful about punishing Slovakia or wanting to punish Slovakia and Hungary for exercising their democratic right. We might not like that they side with Russia, but they have a right to do so democratically. Now, the problem then comes if that upsets European security. If you are voting against the security of Europe, then we've got problems. So if some of your decision making in these, or some of your voting in European matters, helps Russia to the extent that it threatens the security of the European Union, then I think there's justification for having a word and doing something there. But anyway, just be wary. Okay, now on to Kaja Kallas. So I went through this morning. Russia is no superpower. I love the way she phrases this. After more than a decade of conflict, including 4 years of full-scale war in Ukraine, Russia has barely advanced beyond the 2014 lines, and the cost, 1.2 million casualties. Today, Russia is broken. The economy is in shreds. It is disconnecting from the European energy markets, and its own citizens are fleeing. The greatest threat Russia presents right now is that it gains more at the negotiating table than it has achieved on a battlefield. And the reason why it gains more on the negotiating table is because the United States under Trump has allowed Russia to gain on the negotiating table. It is, in fact, advocating on behalf of that kind of Russia, really. Now, a couple of instances of Kaja Kallas being pretty savage. She's one of my favorite European leaders.
And coming to the question that we are not at the table, we are not at the table because the Russians really see that they get what they haven't achieved militarily. They hope that they get this diplomatically at the negotiation table, and Americans will deliver this to them. Now, we Europeans, we can't agree to these things. Now, there comes a point.
This is a direct attack on that approach of the United States in supporting and advocating for Poland,
Where
Russia.
So Russians understand that the things that they actually need or think that the Americans will deliver are dependent on Europe. So we shouldn't be the demandeurs that, take us to the table, but we should discuss what we want to achieve when we are at the table. And that's why I say we have seen a lot of concessions, a lot of pressure on Ukraine. And of course, it's easy because they are the weaker part. Why don't you just surrender and give them what they want, and we will have peace? We already had that. And what we had more wars. So that this is time where we have to respond to the maximalist demands that Russia is presenting, also with the demands on their side. Because if we want a sustainable peace, then we need concessions also from the Russian side. And the things that they need, lifting of the sanctions, frozen assets, all this is European decision. If we don't, just agree to whatever America is negotiating, then, you need to talk to us.
Absolutely right. You can't unilaterally decide to do things because actually we've got a horse in the race. We are integral with regard to sanctions. You can't just ignore us. We should have a seat at the table. And yeah, really, really, I think, eloquently establishing that the European position is really not aligned to the American position.
It's very hard for me to believe these accusations. Coming from a country that is number 2 in the press freedom index, hearing criticism regarding press freedom coming from a country that is 58 on this list, it's interesting.
That I love. So that is JD Vance, don't you dare come to Europe and slag us off for freedom of speech. I come from a country in Europe that is second in the freedom of speech index. And you, JD Vance, come from a country that at the moment is 58th. How dare you lecture us on freedom of speech? How dare you lecture us on freedom of speech, JD Vance? Not acceptable. Jog on. Take a long walk off a short pier. Anyway, one more from her. Let's listen to a bit more. Kallas.
Contrary to what some may say, woke, decadent Europe is not facing civilizational erasure.
So this is, again, direct, taking a position directly against JD Vance and the national security strategy. So civilizational erasure was a term in the national security strategy that Europe is facing civilizational erasure because of migration and because of wokeism and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, shut up.
Contrary to what some may say, woke, decadent Europe is not facing civilizational erasure. In fact, people still want to join our club, and not just fellow Europeans. When I was in Canada last year, I was told that over 40% of Canadians have an interest in joining the European Union. So the waiting list is quite long. I just hope that those who have been waiting for quite some time would not have to wait for longer.
So there you go. I said that was the last. Here we had. Oh no, we've already had that one. So that's a freedom of speech one. Sorry, I'm looking ahead. Right. And then, Mette Frederiksen. So going back, actually, I should have had this earlier. For Ukraine, the red lines on using Western weapons are still in place. So this is Sean Pinner talking about what Mette Frederiksen says. And you don't win a war. Oh, no, he's quoting Mette Frederiksen. So let's have this in full. And you don't win a war with one hand tied behind your back. Speaking at Munich Security Conference, Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen said discussions about allowing Ukraine to use Western supplied weapons are still ongoing, but no decisions have been made. Quote, for the last three conferences, I've been asking the same question: why aren't we providing the air defense Ukraine desperately needs? She said, and every time the answer is the same: hesitation and shrugged shoulders. She added that if Ukraine had been given the necessary permissions earlier, the situation would look very different today. For example, ATACMS Biden not given permission until the North Koreans entered the war, and that if he had given permissions for ATACMS to be used, Russian air bases full of fighter bombers would have been destroyed. We know what needs to be done, but first we need to finally admit, understand, and accept one hard truth: Russia is not going to change. Good. So then we're moving now almost finally to Pedro Sánchez, the Spanish kind of left-wing leader. So, you've got people like, I guess, Radosław Sikorski, I imagine is probably center-right. A lot of politicians that even like Ursula von der Leyen, Emmanuel Macron, Friedrich Merz all sit on the center-right wing part of the spectrum. So what about the sort of left-wing leaders in Europe? Well, actually, it's good to hear this from Pedro Sánchez here, the Spanish Prime Minister.
No, we can do it, but what we have to do is to strengthen the European defense industry. And that means that paradoxically, if we agree with this idea of 5%, at the end of the day, we will become more dependent on the US defense industry. And that is why I think that we need to focus more on not only how much do we spend, but how much do we spend together and therefore better.
So this is very much an Emmanuel Macron sort of statement, which is like, if we're going to get to 5% of GDP, all this is doing, and that's kind of possibly why Donald Trump demanded this, which is like 5% of GDP. So either you're going to fail, in which case NATO falls apart, brilliant, that's what I like, and we can pull out of NATO. That's kind of a Trumpian position. Or you are spending 5% on GDP, and most of that's going to be spent on US arms manufacturers. So a lot of that money be coming into the United States. So then you've got Emmanuel Macron saying, yep, okay, if we're going to spend all this money, we need to spend it on EU stuff, on European arms. So we need to economically stimulate the European industrial sectors. And you've got Pedro Sánchez saying this as well. Paradoxically, if we agree to this idea of 5%, it's just going to benefit the United States in terms of the industry. So NATO increased spending needs to be spent inwards in Europe, and we need to think long and hard about that. So I'm going to just read out the synopsis of what he says here, or the transcription to make it a bit quicker. We must stop Putin, says Sanchez. We must strengthen our deterrence capabilities. However, let us do it in a coordinated and targeted manner so that we remain in control of the process. Let us build a true European army, not in 10 years, but now. Spain will contribute all necessary resources. That's a really big statement. So Spain are the fourth biggest economy in Europe, am I right? It's Germany, France, Italy, and then Spain. So they're one of the big hitters in Europe, but they aren't a big defense spender in terms of percentage of GDP. So he's actually turning up to the party now. Let us strengthen our multilateral system, reform and reinforce the institutions which, despite their shortcomings, have preserved peace in the West for decades. And let us also invest in the values of solidarity, empathy, and cooperation that have brought us this far. Because the weapon the world most urgently needs is moral strength. And what we must do is strengthen Europe's defense industry, paradoxically. And then he goes on to say, if we agree to this 5% idea regarding defense spending, we will ultimately become even more dependent on the US defense industry. So, interesting stuff from Pedro Sánchez there. Okay, so then on to and then I've got one more from Kaja Kallas, but it fits in with what
as President
Pedro
Macron
Sánchez
said in Davos
was just saying there, because she's talking about reform and also ideas of veto and what to do with Hungary and Slovakia, etc.
As President Macron said in Davos, Europe is sometimes too slow, for sure.
Reference to Macron's use of for sure in his good speech in Davos.
Sometimes too slow, for sure, and needs to be reformed, for sure. But we absolutely know what we are and what we stand for. As President Macron said.
So, and I like this, there's this real sense of European identity going on at the moment in a kind of pushback to what the United States said last year and this year, and this divorce that's going on between the two entities. We already know what we are and what we stand for. You know, there's a consistency to Europe. We've not seen, you know, from I guess Obama to Trump to Biden to Trump. There's a very much up and down going on in the United States at the moment, and there's a lack of predictability and reliability, whereas Europe so far has been really consistent precisely because it's so big, and it's very difficult to have one extreme element take control of the whole of the European Union. The proportional representation nature of elections means that is very unlikely to happen, and that is fundamental to understanding Europe's stability. Is that you have to work in coalitions, and you have to work in coalitions because they are, you know, you just have this wide spectrum of parties that get elected. However, there is a growth of the far right, and the far right is now looking at having 30% of votes in and across many countries. Reform at the moment in the UK, and I know people go, oh, don't call them far right. I suggest that if you have people in Reform saying what they're saying at the moment, politicians, and then advocating for ICE to come over and do what they're doing in the United States, in the UK, I'd say that's fairly far right. But yeah, so but it's really interesting that Europe has actually been this very reliable and constant force in global geopolitics, and this is the idea that we know who we are and what we stand for. I think is interesting. However, and this is the success of the Trump approach to trying to disunite Europe and pull it apart, and also not just the EU but the UN. So we have the Board of Peace, right? The Board of Peace is this thing that Trump has started to be this grifting alternative to the United Nations, but most European nations have turned it down. Italy turned it down. You know, loads of nations have turned it down. But we hear over the last 24 hours that Meloni has actually gone back now and said she will take Italy into Trump's Board of Peace to find the European understanding against joining, and perhaps also violating the Italian constitution. Faced with a choice between the EU and the US, Meloni will choose Trump every time, says this particular source, Dave Keating. But I think that's a problem. I think there was a real strength in European unity in not joining this. This is exactly what Trump's going to want to see. And sadly enough, you've got Nicolae Dan from Romania, who's a very centrist pro-European, shockingly the president of Romania, which for whatever reason decided to completely skip the Munich conference, has now decided to attend Trump's Board of Peace meeting instead, alongside Viktor Orban and Alexander Lukashenko and a handful of Central Asian dictators and Russia, and now, of course, Meloni. So we're hearing they're going as observers at the Board of Peace. This is bad. Now, all I can think is that behind the scenes, Nicolae Dan has been pressured massively by the United States. Now, NATO plays a massive role in Romania. My guess, and this is, of course, 100% speculation, my guess is it's something like, if you don't come to the Board of Peace, we will pull American NATO troops and NATO infrastructure out of Romania. I bet you it's something like that. I bet you. So that is a real shame in my book. Not a fan of that at all. Right. That's probably enough from me. I need to get to some of your comments. I'm just seeing if there is stuff in my general geopolitical stuff. Yeah, actually, let's look at a couple of elements here. I've got some other things I was going to share in just a separate, not a Munich Security Conference, but talking about Canada earlier. This is an idea that I've been discussing with you a number of times, that Germany and the UK, I think, are relying on helping Ukraine, stimulating our economy by defense expenditure. And I think this has been quite explicit from Germany. And I think this is also what Keir Starmer is doing. And it's interesting that Financial Times reports that Canada aims to create 125,000 jobs by increasing military spending to 5% of GDP over the next decade and shifting away from US arms manufacturers, according to a new strategy paper. So again, like Europe saying, we don't want to spend our money on getting to 5% of GDP, like Pedro Sánchez says, on the United States arms, military industrial complex. We want to be spending it on our own. Canada looks to be going that kind of way as well, which is I think interesting. What else? You've got Trump again advocating for Viktor Orban, coming out with a Truth Social post, which is as obsequious towards dictators and dictator wannabes as you would imagine it to be. So that's still going on. More bad news for Hungary's Russian-backed Viktor Orban regime, as one of the country's most accurate polling firms, 21 Kulaloközpont, reports apocalyptic numbers for the obese kleptocrat. Ouch. A likely humiliating defeat coming in the April elections, says Jay in Kiev, showing this 53% to 37%. So look at the loss of Orban's Fidesz there, going from 54.1% down to 37%. So there's a 16% difference between the two. Absolutely shocking numbers there. So we have Tisza EPP on 54% plus 4, Fidesz on 37, depends where how you round it, I guess, minus 6 there, down 6. And then others, messing around below the 5% mark. I don't know if there's a 5% threshold in Hungary for those votes. And then just a few bits. Greece is reportedly blocking, I don't know if this is still the case, whether it's now got through, because this is going back about 5 days, but Greece is reportedly blocking the EU's 20th sanctions package since Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Greece on every occasion has obstructed and caused the people of Ukraine immeasurable harm, says Robin Brooks. Worst of all, Greece helped Russia build the shadow fleet. As we've discussed before, they transferred, Greece has a huge shipping industry, and loads of fleets transferred vessels from Greek fleets to disappeared to the Russian shadow fleet. And so Greece is one of the biggest kind of supporters, if you like, of the Russian hydrocarbons industry. Malta too, Cyprus too, right? Greece and Malta are blocking the EU's plan to replace Russia's oil price cap with a ban on shipping services. Of course, that will very much affect Greece. The two maritime states fear the switch could hurt Europe's shipping industry and push up energy prices. I mean, they're probably right there, and that's one of the challenges. But yeah, so I don't know whether that is still the case. Just a few more bits. Lukoil has bought a Dutch refinery for $725 million. Sanctions just handed it back. So Total Energies reclaims full ownership of the Zeeland plant as US sanctions force Russia's second largest oil producer to get rid of a $22 billion global empire. So interesting. I hope that will affect the Russian economy. And then just a few final bits here. McDonald's is the latest company to re-register its trademark in Russia. To be fair to them, Burger King never left Russia and kept making blood money and contributing to the Kremlin's war chest. And then BMWs, Toyotas, and Porsches keep flowing into Russia, routed through China via grey market schemes, says the Euromonitor Press, that dodge sanctions. New cars get registered in China, relabeled as used, and shipped to Russian dealers at full price. Automakers say that they can't stop it. So it's not a fault, like I've said to you before. It's very easy to blame the manufacturers, but actually they're not the ones that are doing this particularly, or they don't have any control over what happens once these widgets or cars in this case are sold. So yeah, there you go. There's a few more bits and pieces for you. Let's now go to your comments and whatnot. Right. Okay. Thank you for still being here. I know it's a Sunday night, probably not your ideal way of spending a Sunday night, or maybe exactly your ideal way of spending a Sunday night. What do I have to say? Yeah, so I love this. What are we discussing? I think someone came in just as I was going through mirror neurons and morality and ethics. Some people question whether I should talk about stuff like that. Is what I do. And hopefully it is of more interest than me just spitting geopolitics. To which Paragon says, love it when JP imparts his moral, ethical arguments with common sense arguments, knowledge that helps persuade. So thank you for that. Thank you for that feedback. And John P says, look, I love your passion. You are a go-to for geopolitics. Thank you so much for all your hard work. You're a start. Thank you. I'm not saying that to self-aggrandize, but it's this idea that not only will I tell you about stuff that's in my head to do with philosophy or psychology, stuff that I've written about or I'm deeply interested in, but I will wear my sleeve, my shirt, my emotions on my sleeve. Like I don't hold back. So, you know, sometimes I will get a little bit ranty. Julian Rossiter, thank you for your memberships there. You are an officer and a gentleman. Stephen Bendel, my wife and I use our ATP Geopolitics NATO mugs daily, but they are always hand washed, so still good as new. Damn it. Yeah, I'm just going to have to reinvest in the British mug making industry. But I do love my NATO mugs. By the way, there is all my this is a top that is a bit of merch that you can get. You know, there's loads of stuff you can get down in the description. I'm not asking you to do so. I get like a minimal cut in this stuff, but I do love some of the designs and things. Chris from Clockwork Designs really helped out with a lot of it. Benny Pye's also done some stuff. So we've got a bunch of stuff in the merch down there. So you can get some ATP Geopolitics stuff. You can get mouse mats. Look, I've got a mouse mat that's massive and old and very dirty now. I've got also Tippling Philosopher stuff, as well as just ATP. Remember, ATP Geopolitics stands for Atippling Philosopher. It's what I do. I tipple and I philosophize, or at least I used to. Now I geopoliticize. Anyway, this is my waffling end. What else do we have? Thank you, Paul Gilbert. 300 extra subscribers, RFIbers since last Sunday. That's a 50% more than the last 3 weeks. 100K is the target. Let's go. I didn't realize that. Thank you. I'm struggling to move I still think YouTube just hates me. For those of you who joined me later than like 3 years ago, right at the beginning when I was reporting the war in Ukraine and I was campaigning against disinformation, YouTube banned me for a week for misinformation. And it was like a 45-minute video. And they said, you've been banned for misinformation. And here is what misinformation means. And it like gave about 20 kind of reasons that I could have been banned for. I said, this is really annoying because I literally campaign against this, and you are now banning me for a week. So it's like cutting off my income for a week. But you're not telling me what you're banning me exactly for. So I've got a 45-minute video, and you're saying something in that video fell foul of this list of things. So imagine you've taken me to court for wrongdoing, because you are taking my income away, and you're taking me to court for wrongdoing, but you just said you committed one of these crimes here and you committed it over this time period, but we're not going to tell you what you did and why it was wrong. So see you later. So I was challenging this, and I was thinking about taking them to court. And in the end, I just had to suck it up for a week, right? And I used my other channel, my Atippling Philosopher channel, to put out my Ukraine stuff. And but it really hurt. Like, it hurt me psychologically, because like I'm so against disinformation and misinformation that if you're telling me I've done some bit of misinformation, I was thinking like this has clearly been flagged up by Russian trolls. And I was talking a lot about this at the time. Anyway, end result is I think at that point YouTube decided to just hold me back. And so all these other channels, I was like progressing quite nicely. And then all these other channels just, Greg Terry and everyone else flew past me. And now they do things better than me, more concisely than me, whatever. Like, there's nothing to do with it. But it's just like, what annoys me is that I work really, really hard. And not that I want any more. I'm not being greedy. I'm just get annoyed when I think things are unfair. I think it's a fairness thing. It seems to be what floats my boat. And most times I get annoyed and angry. It's to do with fairness. And it's just like, it's just not fair that my channel appears to be getting held back by YouTube. But I don't know if it definitely is the case. It might just be that I'm just a bit crap at what I do, and I need to be a lot quicker. I mean, it's been banging on for an hour and a half and I'm still banging on. So, I think that's a problem. I have a problem. I have a speaking problem. The Pirate says, what you do, JP, what do you think would happen, US reaction, if Germany and Poland, maybe Sweden, would acquire nukes? Fascinating. I don't know, but they won't like it. When you look in history, when the US has got really, really nervy about stuff, it's to do with nukes. There was what was it called? The was it the Sapphire or the Emerald project, or the one where breakup of the Soviet Union, and there were nukes in Azerbaijan or whatever, and there was a massive undercover operation to go and get those nukes. Like, they do not like other people having nukes for obvious reasons, for good reasons. That's perfectly bona fide. I would imagine they would be very strongly against that. And also, it also means that like the UK would be more likely to break away from being dependent on the US for its nukes. So our Trident nuclear deterrent comes from the US, and the maintenance comes from the US, and we're very dependent on the US. And I would argue we shouldn't be anymore, and we should go the France route, or we get together with France, but make sure it's independent so that we aren't dependent on France. We work with France, and yeah. So I think the US would not like that for both security reasons and also for the possibility that other nations will be less likely to be reliant on the United States, both for the technology or for the nuclear umbrella, because that gives the US leverage, right? So that they have the nuclear capabilities and the ability to be the nuclear deterrent in Europe means that they have stationing over Europe, but it also means that they get to dictate foreign policy. And this is the tension we always talk about, which is that the more the US pushes Europe away, the more Europe stands up on its own 2 feet, and the less say the United States has in European policy making, right? So, there's less chance of them getting a return on investment. Turns out that Benny Pye's now in the background, and he's pumping out the or at least potentially looking at comments from me to highlight. So thank you very much, Benny. We want a Doris mug. That's something we've thought about, actually. So we'll probably get that patch, the new Car for Ukraine patch. We'll get that on a mug. We'll get that, Benny. That's our next thing. Let's get that on the merch. The new Doris patch with the disaster girl looking back and seeing the Kremlin burn. That's what we want to see. Mitch Mazzarol, legend of the multiverse, of tea fund donation. I just finished my tea. Thanks as ever. Thank you as ever, Mitch. Such a wonderful human. And I've interviewed Mitch as well on my ATP channel, because he's actually, been following me in terms of my philosophy before I was doing all this stuff. Yes, this is it. I mean, this is my problem. Mark says, your work is great, but your videos are sometimes way too long, and I therefore sometimes skip them. Apologies for that. You may want to keep your videos shorter. I definitely do. I just can't help it. There's too much to talk about. You are right, though. This is definitely an issue of mine. So maybe I should stop talking and go. Look, everybody, I'm going to stop talking and I'm going to go. But not before I say, yeah, Betty Pie. You're great at what you do. Content is an issue. I think we just had to play with the algorithm game more. Like the cycle team analogy, it's all about 1% improvements and add them all up. Yeah, we are doing that. Thumbnails are different, descriptions are different. All these things, it is changing slowly but surely. ATPGO is my #1 channel for Ukraine and geopolitical news. So thank you. And Google being unfair and obtuse, I'm shocked, I tell you, says Lag Monster. And finish, guys, sometimes truths are such that they cannot be told in a short time. Yeah, and also anything I ever say, truths, talk about sport, with my mates down the pub, nothing I ever say it can be told in a short time. It is pathological. I've got pathological not speaking avoidance. Yeah. Thank you very much for being such loyal guys and girls. I really appreciated. If dearly loved by those that follow you. If that counted for anything, you'd be at 500,000 already. Yeah, I wish that'd be so. Disinformation that you give misinformation. I love it. Yes, Michael Lamming. That's what I believe. And just finally, thank you very much to Rob as well. I'm hoping to go to Ukraine with Rob at some time soon, and Betty Pie and the rest of the crew. 100K will come. Yes, thanks for your support, Rob. Can't wait to have a beer with you, my friend. Love that Doris patch. Yeah, thank you to JR, to Benny Pie, and to Chris at Clockwork Designs for that. The main reason that you don't get more subscribers is because your videos are so long and full of info. My personal opinion is that I don't want you to change a thing. You bang out so much. Thanks, John P. The likelihood of me changing is slim to none. I do try and get shorter like breaking news videos out and stuff like that. They're much more digestible. Something like this, okay, this ending has been way too long, but like I've got to go through all of that to give you a sense of what's gone on. It's just what's going on. It's just, and if you're here, you're here. If you're not, you're a loser. Take care, everybody. Big love. Thanks to Benny Pie. Thanks to the mods. Thanks to everyone. You're all legends. Give yourself a pat on the back for being a legend. And please go to atpgo.com/donate and you can help out with our Call for Ukraine fundraiser. Thank you. Take care. Toodle pips.